Something very calculated is happening with the Detroit Lions right now, and if you've been paying close attention to how this front office is operating, you can start to see a very clear pattern forming, and the latest moves only reinforce that idea. This isn't about chasing headlines or winning the offseason. This is about precision, timing, and understanding exactly where this roster stands today. Because here's the reality, the Lions are not in the same position as a lot of these other teams. They're not scrambling to find star players, they already have them. While teams like the Raiders, Titans, and Jets are throwing money around trying to build a foundation, Detroit is working from a position of strength. They're not trying to create a roster, they're refining one that already exists, and that's where these moves start to make a lot more sense. Take the addition of DJ Wanham, for example. At first glance, it might not feel like a major splash, and that's exactly why some fans hesitate. But when you look deeper, it's a direct replacement move. You move on from a player like Charles Harris or others in that rotation, and instead of overpaying or reaching, you bring in someone who fits the system and fills the role without disrupting the financial structure. That's not random, that's intentional, but the move that really stands out here is Greg Dortch. This is where you see the Lions being extremely smart. You let Khalif Raymond walk, someone who has been valuable, no doubt, but also someone who is now in his early 30s. You got his best years, you maximized his prime, and instead of holding on too long or overpaying for past production, you pivot. You bring in Greg Dortch, who is 27 years old, entering his prime, and offers almost a mirror skill set: return ability, explosiveness, versatility on offense. He checks the same boxes. But here's the key difference: timeline and cost. You're potentially getting the same level of production, but aligned with the current competitive window of the team. And there's another layer to this that matters even more: familiarity. When you bring in a free agent from the outside, there's always risk. You don't fully know how that player fits in the locker room, how they handle adversity, or how they respond to coaching. But when there's a connection, like a coach who already knows the player, that risk drops significantly. That's what makes this move even smarter. There's already trust in the evaluation. There's already confidence in the personality and fit. That's how good teams operate. Then you look at the addition of Damon Clark, and again, it fits the same pattern. This isn't about bringing in a superstar linebacker. This is about depth, speed, and special teams impact. The Lions already have their core pieces at linebacker. What they need are those high-energy, versatile players who can contribute in multiple ways. Clark brings that, and more importantly, he brings a mindset that aligns with what this defense wants to be: aggressive, fast, and physical. He already has a connection with the coaching staff, especially with Kelvin Shepard, and that matters. When a player is excited to play for a coach and already understands the system, the transition becomes smoother and faster. And this is where a lot of fans might be missing the bigger picture. Because these moves aren't happening in the first wave of free agency, it creates this illusion that the Lions are being passive, that they're not improving, but in reality, they're doing the opposite. They're just doing it differently. They're identifying value instead of chasing names. They're replacing production instead of paying for past performance. They're staying disciplined while other teams are reacting. And when you step back and look at the roster as a whole, something becomes very clear. There aren't many holes left. You can go position by position, and there isn't a glaring weakness where you say, this has to be fixed immediately. That's a position of power heading into the draft. Because now, instead of drafting out of desperation, you can draft with flexibility. You still want premium positions like defensive end and offensive tackle. That hasn't changed. But now it's not a must. It's a preference. And that changes everything about how you approach draft night. Even along the offensive line, there's confidence. The team has addressed the center position, upgraded depth, and created competition. Players like Juice Scruggs add stability, and overall, the line looks solid enough to support the offense without needing a major overhaul. And when you zoom out even further and look at the division, things get even more interesting. Other teams are dealing with real issues: roster turnover, key losses, uncertainty at critical positions. Meanwhile, the Lions are sitting here, not perfect, but stable, structured, intentional. They've lost some players, yes, but those departures weren't mistakes. They were timed decisions, players who had reached the end of their peak value with the team, and instead of holding on too long, the Lions move forward. It's like recognizing when something has run its course and choosing not to force it any further. That's how sustainable contenders are built. So now the question becomes this: if the Lions truly don't have any major holes left on this roster, and they're entering the draft with this level of flexibility and confidence, are they actually in a better position now than they were at the end of last season? What do you think? think. And that's where things start to get really interesting, because once you accept the idea that this roster doesn't have obvious holes anymore, the entire conversation around the Detroit Lions shifts from what do they need to how far can they push this? Because now it's no longer about fixing weaknesses, it's about maximizing strengths. Think about that for a second. When you're a team that has to patch multiple gaps, every decision feels urgent. You're drafting for survival. You're signing players just to stay competitive. But that's not where Detroit is anymore. They've built a foundation where every move from this point forward is about elevating the ceiling, not raising the floor. And that's a dangerous place for the rest of the league, because now, if they go into the draft and take a defensive end early, it's not because they're desperate. It's because they want to create a dominant rotation. If they take an offensive tackle, it's not because they're in trouble. It's because they're thinking long-term protection and depth. Every pick becomes strategic, not reactive. And that's how you build something sustainable. Now go back to the moves we talked about earlier. Greg Dortch replacing Khalif Raymond. Damon Clark coming in as a fast, aggressive linebacker with special teams value. DJ Wanham adding depth to the edge rotation. None of these are flashy, but together, they reinforce something much bigger. This roster is being layered with purpose. There's no panic here, no overcorrections, just calculated adjustments. And let's talk about that Khalif Raymond decision a little more, because it perfectly represents what this front office is doing. Raymond gave this team everything during his time in Detroit. He was productive, reliable, and played a key role during an important stretch. But the Lions understood something critical. They already got his best years. Instead of paying for what he did, they moved on and found someone who can potentially give them the same impact moving forward, aligned with the team's timeline. That's not easy to do, especially when fans and locker rooms grow attached to players. But it's necessary if you want to stay ahead instead of falling behind. And that same logic applies across the board. Look at the linebacker situation. Instead of forcing a direct replacement for Alex Anzalone, the Lions trust what they already have in Jack Campbell. That's internal development. That's planning ahead. Then you bring in someone like Damon Clark to complement the group, not carry it. It's subtle, but it's powerful. Because what you're really seeing here is confidence. From the front office, from the coaching staff, and from the roster itself. Confidence that the core is strong enough. Confidence that the system works. Confidence that they don't need to chase every big name to stay competitive. And while all of this is happening, you look around the division and it feels like other teams are still trying to figure themselves out. There are questions everywhere. Rosters in transition, key players leaving, uncertainty in critical areas. Meanwhile, Detroit is building continuity, and continuity in the NFL is one of the hardest things to achieve. So when you combine that stability with smart roster management, strategic signings, and the flexibility they now have heading into the draft, you start to see why this moment matters so much. This isn't just another offseason. This is the kind of offseason that determines whether a team stays competitive or takes that next step into becoming a true contender year after year. And the Lions are positioning themselves for that second path. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Because if everything goes according to plan, if these role players hit, if the young core continues to develop, and if they nail even a couple of picks in the draft, this team might not just be maintaining its level, they might actually be getting better without ever making a headline move. And that's the part that should get every Lions fan paying attention right now. Because when a team improves quietly like this, it usually means the rest of the league doesn't fully see it coming until it's too late. So now it comes down to this. Do you believe this strategy, this patient, calculated approach, is enough to take the Lions to the next level? Or do you still feel like they're missing that one big move to truly put them over the top? And if you're still here, it means you're starting to see it the same way. This isn't random, and it's definitely not accidental. Because what the Lions are doing right now is setting themselves up so that every future move becomes even easier. When your roster is balanced like this, when you don't have glaring needs, you're not forced into bad decisions, you're not reaching in the draft, you're not overpaying in free agency, you're simply choosing the best option available every single time. That's how you stay competitive year after year. And let's be real for a moment. This is not something Lions fans have always been able to say. For a long time, this team was stuck in cycles of rebuilding, reacting, and trying to catch up. But now, for the first time time in a long time, it feels like Detroit is ahead of the curve instead of behind it. That's a completely different mindset. Now the expectations change. Now it's not just about making the playoffs or being competitive. Now it's about sustaining success, winning the division consistently, and positioning yourself as a legitimate threat in the NFC every single season. And that's why these small moves matter so much, because when you stack enough smart decisions on top of each other, eventually you build something that's hard to break. A roster that can handle injuries, a team that can adapt week to week, a system that doesn't rely on one or two players to carry everything. That's what the Lions are quietly building. So as we move closer to the draft and continue through this offseason, keep this in mind. Don't just look for the big headlines. Look at the structure. Look at the fit. Look at how each piece connects to the bigger picture. And once a team reaches that point, when identity is no longer a question but a strength, that's when things can really take off. Because now it's not just about talent on paper. It's about execution, chemistry, and consistency. The Lions aren't trying to figure out what kind of team they want to be anymore. They already know. Physical, disciplined, aggressive, and smart with how they manage every part of the roster. And that clarity shows up everywhere. It shows up in how they replace players before it becomes a problem. It shows up in how they trust their young core instead of blocking their development. It shows up in how they avoid emotional decisions and stick to a long-term plan, even when it's not the most popular move in the moment. That's the difference between a team that flashes for one season and a team that stays relevant. And here's something that shouldn't be overlooked. This approach also creates internal competition. When you bring in players like Greg Dortch or Damon Clark, you're not just filling roles. You're pushing the guys already on the roster. You're raising the standard across the board. Nobody gets comfortable. Every position group gets sharper, faster, more prepared. And over the course of a long NFL season, that depth and internal competition can be the difference between winning key games or falling short when adversity hits. Because it always hits. Injuries happen, slumps happen, unexpected situations come up, and when they do, the teams that survive are the ones that prepared for it before it ever became an issue. That's exactly what Detroit is doing right now. They're not waiting for problems, they're staying ahead of them. And if you really think about it, that might be the most important takeaway from this entire offseason so far. Not a single move feels desperate. Not a single decision feels forced. Everything connects back to a bigger vision. So when you combine that with a roster that already proved it can compete at a high level, you start to understand why there's so much quiet confidence around this team. This isn't hype. This is structure. This is planning. This is a team that's building something that's meant to last. And now, with the draft still ahead and more opportunities to add talent, the ceiling hasn't even been fully reached yet. There's still room to grow, still room to improve, still room to take another step forward. That's what should have Lions fans paying attention more than anything else. Because if this front office keeps hitting on these types of moves, if they keep finding value, developing talent, and staying disciplined, then what you're watching right now might just be the early stages of something even bigger than what we've already seen. So now I want to hear from you. Are you fully buying into this approach, or is there still a part of you that wants to see that one big aggressive move before you're completely convinced? And here's the part that could end up defining everything we've talked about so far: how this team handles expectations